G'day, Demon Landers. G'day, Demons fans. Thanks for that introduction, Andy. Looking forward to your return to Melbourne and to the podcasts. My name's Bin Man. Welcome back to the Stats File podcast, the standalone Demonland Stats File podcast, the review of the D's game and preview of the Lions game coming up on this weekend. If you're listening, I'm recording this on Friday. I'm in the spirit of trying to get this podcast right and I guess of sort of some value. I'm going to make another slight tweak to the show, same structure. However, I've decided that rather than a forensic review of the previous game, I'm going to instead, I'll still do a stats focus review of the previous game, just not as detailed, and I'll do a more thorough stats focus preview of the upcoming game. So that's why it's going out on Friday. The plan is to keep the show in the same time envelope, somewhere between 30 to 40 minutes. With about a 50-50 split between the review of last week's game and the preview of the upcoming game. As I said, the aim is to release it Friday morning, so there's some content hopefully early in the morning. No, it won't be this week because Andy's got to upload it and do add the intros and stuff from overseas, which much respect for him for doing that. Part of my thinking is in doing it is that hopefully that'll increase the pool of people who might listen to the Stats File podcast, because often people are looking for info about an upcoming game. I often am, and there's really bugger all preview content in the mainstream or non-mainstream, for example, other pods in the media that is doing a preview of the upcoming game, apart from those stupid betting related ones that are on different platforms and shows that preview all games, and with each game only getting about 90 seconds. So back in the day, that used to be part of the newspaper. I'd love it and pick up the newspaper on a Thursday and get a preview of the upcoming games and a proper analysis on the Sunday. But you can't seem to get that stuff as commonly anymore. So hopefully this show will fill a bit of a gap from that perspective. It means there's also Demonland content, podcast content on Mondays and then again later in the week. It also means I don't have to do the back-to-back pods, which was proving a little bit logistically tricky and I have to say a little bit confusing for me because I couldn't remember which show I'd said something on. So as I said on this podcast, I couldn't remember it. So, the focus will be, probably the 50-50 split, depending on how we went in the previous game. So, we were pretty poor against the Bombers, so maybe it's a 40-60 split with the review of that game and the preview of our game against the Lions. Let's see how that goes. Let's see what the response is. I'm also going to create a standalone thread on Demonland that has got all of these, the Stats File podcast, so they're in the one spot, and a bit about my rationale. So jumping into, as I said, I'll keep pretty much the same structure. Why we won or lost, I'll just really briefly talk to the equity points, 3 phases of football: defense, offense, and contest, and finish with a preview of our next game, which of course this week is against the Lions. So jumping into why we lost, I mentioned this on the Demonland podcast on Monday night with George. Last against the Suns, we won because we were the better side. As Hardwick said in his presser, at the end of the day, I just thought we got beaten around a contest. If you can't win the ball and you can't put pressure on a contest, all of a sudden your backs are under enormous pressure. End of story. In that game, we were 11 plus 11 for clearances, plus 22 for contested possessions, and we had more plus 14 for inside 50. So Hardwick's sort of assessment of the key indicators of why they lost and why we won was spot on. Against the Bombers, they're all pretty much flips. So we went from being plus 11 to clearances to minus 11 for total clearances, including minus 13 in the second half, which was disastrous. We were really poor in the second half. And, once they got the wind in their sails a little bit, they never looked like losing. I had the opposite feeling last week against the Suns. We were minus 27 for contested possessions in this game, a little smashing. Remember, plus 22 last week. That's almost a 50 a 50 differential turnaround in number of contested possessions from one week to another. That's nuts. And we're -2 for inside 50s. They had 2 more inside 50s. I mentioned last week as well on the podcast and also on the Stats File podcast, wrapping up the Suns win, was that I gave King a lot of credit for his coaching. I think that was a big factor in the win against the Suns. A really terrific tactical and coaching performance from Kingy against the Suns. I think the opposite is true this week. We didn't really have an answer to their tactics, so Scott had a good night or a good afternoon in the box. Was it afternoon? Yes, it was afternoon, 1 o'clock. The obvious one was, everyone could see it, is that keeping soft tactics and keeping the ball out of our hands and being happy to kick laterally in the back half. And those tactics saw them have 109 more disposals in total than us. And a tick under 199 more uncontested possessions. Huge factor in the game, in their ability to control it, and we didn't really seem to have a tactical response to it. The tactic of using lots of short kicks from a Bombers perspective was clever, and they did the same thing in their loss against the Dogs the previous week, but it mitigates the Bombers' weaknesses and helps them defend and against the Bulldogs. So the Bulldogs are obviously a very attacking side this year, and everyone loves the way they play. We're obviously an attacking side too, the way Kingy's got us playing. We could only get 50 inside 50s in this game. They could only manage 50 inside, when I say they, the Dogs, so as well against the Bombers in a game they won. But it just shows that obviously that's a strategy for the Bombers. Clearly they've got possession of the ball and they're chipping it around their back half. It's hard, we're not getting into our forward line into inside 50. So, yeah, the Doggies could only manage in 50 inside 50s, and so could we in this match. They were also, the Bombers also, that enabled them to, make it difficult for us to get it inside our 50, obviously, and took away our strength of fast transition from the back half. But they also used an extra in defence, meaning when we finally did get the ball off them and go forward, we were kicking to an outnumber inside our 50. That was no doubt a big factor why we couldn't score from our back half in the way we have done in other games, both of those two things together. As I've talked about it, and as I talked about in the Stats File podcast, wrapping up the first one, wrapping up the Freo loss, their symptoms, the fact that they had more disposals, the fact that they beat us in clearance and contested, their symptoms. So what is the underlying cause if you're using a sort of a medical lens or a sort of metaphor? What is the actual cause of the loss? Well, King suggested in his post-match presser that fatigue was a factor, or in fact, he sort of mentioned lethargy a number of times. Under all game plans, but particularly the way King wants us to play, it's, of course, as I've mentioned, ad infinitum, it's a very demanding method, both sort of aerobically, and it demands a particular type of running, high, lots of kilometres at a good clip. So every player now in every team, but particularly ours, has to run north of 10 kilometres a game. Langdon, as I've talked about, he's 15.5, 15.6, almost 16 kilometres a game he's running. And not just running sort of north of 10 kilometres a game, most of that's at a pretty good clip. That's the sort of running required to do the sort of offensive and defensive running King's game plan demands. Losing Salem pretty early in the game, I thought that was probably what it was, halfway through the second quarter. And then Melksham, who was slow to begin anyway, he looked a bit sort of stiff and sore from coming into the game, but then was injured pretty early. So we're basically 2 down for the match. And then, you add T-Mac's lack of leg speed, which was really evident this week. And so we were behind the 8 ball all match in terms of being able to defend, hence our struggles in stopping them chipping the ball around. As I say, that was a strategy, helps them defend, but it was also, I have no doubt, designed to exploit our lack of run, because, I think that that lethargy was evident pretty early. And, I do wonder about the other clubs scouting around the high performance stuff. As I've talked about on the Deanland podcast, over the last few years, it does my head in the lack of interest in the media or focus on the high performance aspect of the game, given how key it is to the outcome of games of footy. But I have no doubt the clubs know where other clubs are at in terms of that running power and where they're at in their high performance programs. It was obviously, that was a really big factor. But it also meant that lack of leg speed not only makes it hard for us to defend, we couldn't press up in the way we should have been for both the person kicking the ball and the receiver. We also really struggled to create overlap on offense with those long handball chains, even though our handball meters gained were okay. We just weren't turning them into scores, hence our woeful score from the back half. I guess the question is, why were we fatigued? And again, I'd sort of point to the lack of analysis or discussion about this in the media. It drives me just despaired. Like, if you look at how the sort of analysis of the second half fade out to the Blues, they just sort of wash over the fact that it's clearly got something to do with their high performance program. I mean, come on, this is a 2-3 year issue for the Blues. It was an issue for us in 24 and 25, an issue for the D's. Again, it does my head in the lack of sort of focus on that aspect. Why were we fatigued? I don't know. I'd love to know. I mean, we had a 6-day break. That was obviously a factor. I think there was some errors made in selection. I would have liked to have seen T-Mac not play perhaps in this game. Melksham, I was surprised he got selected last week, proven wrong, as I said on this podcast. But it sort of, the chickens came home to roost in this game. I mean, he looked a bit out of sorts from the beginning, so did T-Mac. So those older players were struggling on the 6-day backup probably, although Maxi wasn't. Another awesome performance from Maxi. But that doesn't explain or fully explain. It certainly doesn't justify the sort of lethargy King talked about. Obviously just on that, King and the club and the coaching panel would have known, exactly the GPS data and of course had the best handle on our sort of fatigue level as it related to our aerobic stuff. But, maybe psychologically we were off and not as switched on. I really, really hope we didn't take them lightly, but that's how it looked a bit. I said on the Deanland podcast with George that it felt a little bit like we got on top in the second quarter and maybe they thought, well, here we go, we'll get this game on our terms and, away we go. And we just didn't. And they deserved the win. They were a much better side. I also think that it was the first time we've come up against a side who had a tactical strategy designed to mitigate our strength, our ball movement. And that's the first time it's happened for us in either the intra-club games or the practice games and in the 4 games we've played previously. Perhaps both in the box, the coaching, and on field, they really struggled to sort of, I guess, battle or somehow respond to that tactic of the keepings off tactics and the really high uncontested mark and disposal numbers. Whatever the case, as King said himself in the presser, no matter what game plan you've got, if you're fatigued or you're not coming into a game with the right level of intensity and then playing throughout that whole game with the right level of intensity across every 23 players, you're going to lose AFL games of footy, and that's what happened on the weekend. We weren't hard enough, we weren't tough enough. Exactly what Hardwick said about the Suns last week, you could apply to us. Quickly, equity points, I've talked about them. People know what they refer to. It's aggregated player rating points across a number of field, a number of categories, and then aggregated up to all players aggregated up to a team level. So the 2 biggest ones are ball winning. two biggest sort of categories of how points our players can earn rating points are winning the ball and how they use the ball, and then when you aggregate them up, you get a collective team score for them. Notably, they smashed us post clearance for equity points, 147, 116 plus. We were down 30, absolutely smacked us. Ball winning, so post clearance is part of ball winning. Ball winning, they smacked us as well. We only had 94 points, 94.9 points for ball winning, 127.9 differential of plus 33. Just sort of context, we're averaging 110 for winning the ball this season, equity points. So way down on that. AFL average is 110. And using the ball, which has been our strength this season, we're averaging 58.8 after this game. So it was something like 60 before this game. We only went at 53.1 points for ball use in this game. And they were 60.7.1. And now you might say, well, 67.1, they were just chipping it around. And again, this is why I really like the equity and the rating points model, because that's different to it talks about the impact as a scoreboard impact. So that's the key thing for the key reason why I like the equity points model. It measures, in terms of not just winning the ball, but did that parlay into scoreboard impact? And so they were 67.1. So it wasn't just that they were chipping it around. Their ball use got them scores. And AFL average just for this season is 48. So our ball use was above AFL average. Theirs was way above AFL average. Three phases of footy: defence, offence and contest. Defence, the big issue was our pressure was appalling. There's only one quarter where our pressure was an acceptable level. That was the second. Not surprisingly, that was the only quarter we had a positive post-clearance differential. We were plus 12 contested possessions. That was the only quarter in that quarter. That was the only quarter we outscored them as well. No coincidence there. Interestingly, we actually... we still lost contested possessions in that quarter, and we were down on ball winning too. It shows, though, that in that quarter with AFL level intensity, we got great scoreboard impact from our possession when we won post-clearance. So the differential post-clearance is equity points, I should have said. So I mentioned the fatigue. Just the final point on pressure. There's obviously a risk of confusing correlation to causation, but I think it's reasonable to argue that our ball winning is largely dependent on our pressure and contest and intensity, with ball winning equity points being a good measure of those aspects of the game. And the point really I was trying to make with that is, that our only decent quarter of footy was when our pressure rating was 189 to 168 the second quarter. We were plus 21. For the match, it was 171. But the only quarter where we played decent footy was the quarter that we had a decent pressure rating, 189. 180 is considered AFL average, 200 is considered elite. And so, when our pressure rating fell away in the second half, their equity points went bananas. So our ball use collapsed. Our ball use points collapsed. We were minus 13.4 in the third quarter for equity points for how we used the ball, and minus 13.9 in the last quarter. And conversely, theirs went way up in the second half. They were plus 22 for equity points for how they used the ball. Finally, I'll touch on the sort of running power and fatigue. I talked about that against the Suns. And against the Suns, I talked about the evidence of how hard we work defensively. You could see in the numbers, in some of the numbers on the AFL tracker, AFL.com tracker. So it gave us a real sense of how strong our all-team defence was, and our athletic profile and running power of the team was that we had the top 5 players for average speed in defence, which means the average speed players are running when the opponent has the ball, not in the defensive half of the ground. So when the opponent's got the ball, we had the top 5 players for average speed of defence against the Suns, Langdon, Langford, Colt, Sparrow and Laurie. However, this week, and I think reflecting that lethargy that I mentioned and the impact of that being how poor our all-team defence and spread was, whilst we had the top 5 fastest average speed in attack, that's when we have the ball, so running ahead of the ball like Latrell, the top we had the top 5 players for average speed of defence were all bombers. So I think that shows one, their running was much better than ours. Two, their defensive running was much better than ours. But it really highlights how poor our running was. So another, just looking at some other key defensive stats. Big one was we had 12 intercept marks, which is not horrible. We're averaging 15.4 this season, so it's not like it's miles behind us. The big one is they had 21 intercept marks, so 9 more than us. AFL average is 14.1, so that was very impressive. As a big factor. Part of that was our woeful kicking. But I would have to say I was a bit disappointed in JVR's game. He was terrible one-on-one, I thought, and the amount of times Wright was marking the ball back there was absolutely doing my head in. Another defensive stat that jumped out at me is defensive one-on-one losses. 21.4 of those contests, one-on-one contests, we lost. AFL average is 26.4, so not bad from that perspective, but they didn't lose a single one. So they didn't lose one defensive one-on-one contest, and that was a big factor. Again, that's another sort of data point that shows how much more intensity they had during the game, and how far off it we were in that respect. Territory was at 52-48 for this game, was bang on what our season average is, so no problem from that perspective. Interestingly, when we did have our best quarter in the second quarter that I mentioned, we were 49% in our forward half, so under the match one, but we really punched them. And in the third quarter, interestingly, we had 62% of the ball in our forward half, and we just couldn't do anything with it in terms of putting it on the scoreboard, which leads me nicely into offense. Keeping this trend, this is a really interesting trend. I'll have to investigate it. I might ask Wheelo on Demonland if he's got any sort of thoughts about this or any numbers that can drill down on this. But every game so far, every single game we've played, our actual score has been higher than the expected score, and so is the opponent. And in this game, our actual score, of course, was 68. The expected score was 59.6. So Essendon's expected score was 92, and then they scored 113. That doesn't sound right. Is that right? Let's have a look. So they were on an expected score. We only lost that game by 3 points. What was it, 32? Is that right? 32. So they way over in terms of their accuracy. So that was a big factor. I mean, not to say that we deserved to win the game, but I was surprised actually that the unexpected score, I know what I'm saying, 59-92, that's not 3 points. So scratch all of that. Their expected score was 92 and 113, and our expected score was 59-68. But again, that trend is really interesting, and I wonder whether that's a AFL-wide trend. Big factor in terms of offense is they scored 31% of the times they went inside 50. We were hopeless. Only 19% of the time we brought the ball inside 50, we scored. Some other notable offensive stats is disposal. The disposal efficiency kicking into forward 50 retention, so the percentage that the ball's retained when you go inside 50 with a kick. We only could manage 38.6% of the time, and they were 52.3% of the time. AFL average is 47, so they were above AFL average, meaning that 52.3% of their kicks inside 50 were they retained it, which is good going for them. Handball meters gained was fascinating, shows the differences in the sides, game plans. We were way back up. We were down against the Suns in terms of our average. 340 metres gained by hand in this game for us, to their only 66. 274 metres gained by us. AFL average is 210. I was just looking at before in terms of the preview, the Swans are like 454 or something crazy. So yeah, that we were getting it forward, but we were just not creating any space up forward, even though obviously we were trying to move the ball forward. I'd be curious. I don't know what the breakdown is. I can have a look, but I wonder where the big chunk of that was in the second quarter. Some other offensive stats. So sort of related to that, scores for inside 50. This year we're averaging 42.4% of the time. We go inside 50, we score. We're only 34.6% this time. They were 51.9. AFL average is 45, so much more efficient than us going inside. And then goals for inside 50. This one jumped out at me. 19.2% of the time we went inside 50, we scored a goal. AFL average is 24.1. They scored a goal 31.5, so nearly a third of the time, they went inside 50, they scored a goal. And so much more efficient than us, and that probably helps explain, and part of that is the expected score. They really took advantage of their efforts to go inside. Similarly, in terms of transition, there's a number of transition scores, but the one that jumped out at me, transition-related stats, the one that jumped out at me was defensive 50 to score percentage. So how often do you go from the defensive 50 to scoring? 5.4% of the time for us. 10.3, AFL average is 9.8, so they smashed us for the percentage from moving the ball from the defensive 50 to scoring. It almost doubled the percentage in terms of movement from the back half and scoring, which showed that their method was more effective than ours. Even though our method is built for moving the ball from the back half, that was a big factor in the loss, I think. So we didn't score in terms of score sources, we didn't score from kick-in this week. We're averaging 6.6 points a match for that, so we're actually doing that well. They did, conversely. They scored 7 points from kick-ins. Centre bounces, we could only score 2 points from centre bounces. Woeful. They scored 20. We're averaging 10 a match. Stoppages around the ground, so non-centre bounces, we scored 20. They scored 24. They scored 32. We're averaging 24.6, so it wasn't too bad, but they scored 2 more goals, 12 more points than us from stoppages. Turnover actually wasn't as bad as I thought. We scored 46 from turnover. We gave up 54 points on turnover. Our season average is 52. It wasn't too bad, but actually not as bad as I thought it would be. We're chain start, we're chain start region, so 7 of our chains started from defensive 50. We're averaging 18.6. So that was a big factor in the game in terms of where our scoring chains, I should say. So only 7 of our scoring chains started in defensive 50, and we're averaging 18.6. 19 of their scoring chains started in the defensive 50. Season average all teams against us is 20.2. But that those numbers should be reversed for as evidence of our game plan working well. We scored 33 points from the defensive half. They scored 47. So just reflecting probably what I was saying before, they move the ball better than us, unfortunately. Contests, they were down 27 for contested possessions, down 27 for ground ball gets. They smashed us post-clearance contested possession. We were down 19. And post-clearance ground ball gets, they smashed us. Down 14, and they had 4 more contested marks than us. I would have guessed it was going to be higher than that. So they really smashed us in the contest, and that goes back to the lethargy. But you're not going to win many games of footy with the opposition getting 27 more ground ball gets and 27 more contested possessions, in particular 19 more post-clearance contested possessions. This was interesting in terms of clearances. 32 to 40 in total. First possession to clearance percentage is 65% of the time. We got first possession after a clearance, 80.6 to them. So they really smashed us in that respect as well. Another one in terms of contested possessions, they really got us in post-clearance. I've talked about this before. Hardwick has often said it's his favourite stat, or he thinks it's one of the most important stats. We were minus 19 for contested possessions post-clearance. The big sort of category was loose ball gets. Post clearance, they really smashed us for loose ball gets, 36 to 52, down 16. We had 4 centre bounce attendances last week. We only used 4, which was nuts, a long way off the 11 we used against Freo. We had 5 in this game. Cozzy, not including the rucks, as I say. Cozzy, Jack Steele, Sparrow, Caleb Windsor, and interestingly, Jai Cully had 10 centre bounce attendances, and Kay Chandler was the 5th. Alrighty, so that's a wrap up of last week. Disappointing game in the rearview mirror, as Goody would say. Lots and lots of learnings. I feel all learned out with that. So let's look ahead to the D's Lion game. Exciting game. There's, they're a tough team, obviously. A tough team for us to beat, I think, in terms of how we match up against them. Their game plan, we've always struggled, I think, to cover their sort of small, medium utilities and forwards. And, that's going to be a struggle for us this week. In terms of the ins and outs, so coming out of the side is Jakey Melksham is injured. Christian Salem also injured, and Tommy McDonald admitted that's 5, 6, 7, that's 700 plus games AFL footy going out the door. Coming in on the extended bench, so the interchange, Caleb Windsor, Laurie, Xavier Taylor, Matthew Jefferson, Maxie Heath, Latrell Pickett, Jack Henderson and Luca Kenfield. I think, Windsor will obviously play. So I think the ins will be Xavier Taylor's obviously been announced as an in, so Caleb Windsor, Xavier Taylor. I think Jeffo will come in. I think Latrell's the other one on the bench, so he'll be in. So the ins will be, I think, Laurie, Xavier Taylor and Jefferson. They'll be the 3 ins, I believe. We'll see how that plays out, of course. Their out was a good one for us. He always hurts us is Zorko, and who's in for them? Who's in for them is, let's have a look here, Brisbane Lions in. Noah Answorth, another one of those medium-sized utility types that they seem to be able to pull out of the, whatever. They've got hundreds of them, it seems like. Zane Zacko Stelsky, I've got that wrong, but let's call him ZZ Top, James Tunstall and Shadow Bahrain. And fortunately for us, Dane Zorko is out, a player that often plays really well with us. It's great that he's out because he's an excellent kick. He gets under our skin. He's their number one kick in terms of average kicks per game, and he's also key to their transition, number 1 for them for rebounding from 50. He's averaging 5 rebounding 50s per game, so he's a really important player for how they transition the ball. Just sort of in terms of the in, it's awesome that Xavier Taylor is being selected. I was a little bit surprised. Well, I would have been shocked if he got selected after the game. I saw him play at the Bulldogs. But it's awesome, so awesome on 2 levels. One, who doesn't love when a new draftee debuts, particularly first rounder, our first draft pick in last year's draft. 2, it was clear to me, I thought that from various comments made by King, that Xavier XT had some things to work on. And if King's picking him, I assume he's worked on those things to King's satisfaction, so that's awesome. His body language, I said, wasn't great when I watched him against the Roos, and he looks a ways off, to be honest, I'd say, having AFL ready or AFL sort of physicality or body condition. He was much better against the Box Hill Hawks. His body language as well looked a lot better. Obviously, with Salem going out and Bowie being injured, that's here's his opportunity. I was a little bit surprised, I have to say, that AMW wasn't selected, or at least in the on the wider bench, whatever you call it. But he gets his opportunity, and let's hope he takes it. His energy that he'll bring, I think, is terrific. So almost all of if he plays, almost all of our first round draft picks for the last few years will be in this team, which is super exciting as well. His leg speed won't hurt us either. I think he's a straight swap for Salo, wouldn't you think? So high half back, role, kicking inside 50, getting up the ground, being one of those defenders that really press up and look to trap the ball into our forward line and create that squeeze that King's talked about. And hopefully doing a lot of kicking inside 50 the way Salo's done a fair bit of this year. Straight swap for Salo, I reckon. The weather, partly cloudy, light winds, top of 21, unlikely to rain, perfect conditions. Perfect conditions for a good game of footy. The betting, for what it's worth, they're $1.31 to win. We're $3.47. The line is 22.5. If I was a betting man, which I am, I wouldn't go anywhere near that. That line looks a bit skinny to me. I'm a bit surprised. I would have probably added at 28 points or something like that. I think, if I'm honest, I think we'll struggle in this game. So an overview of the game. Like the Bombers and also the Pies, the Lions like to use short mark kicks those to control the ball and the tempo of the game. So those, the way they play is to control the ball. It's really interesting tactically across the AFL. There's two different types of game plans developing. We're playing that sort of style that the the Swans are being best at the moment. That the Suns another one. The long forward handballs, high meters gain per hand by hand. The attacking turnover game from the half back flank, moving it quickly from defensive 50 into forward 50. And then sort of alternative is what the Bombers did and also what the Pies are doing a fair bit of, which is holding on to the ball, lots of lateral kicks, control possession. I think the main focus is because that's to struggle with the transition game. But the Lions game is more aggressive than the Bombers. Yeah, sure, they use lots of short kick mark plays, but they're usually going forward. And then once they get an opportunity to go quick, they get a free play ahead of the ball, then they do go quick or long, whereas the Bombers, go sideways and back a lot. The Lions have the skill also to hit those 20 to 30 metre kicks, whereas the Bombers don't. They're just so critical in footy now. Just so critical in today's game, those sort of kicks. Apologies for that break. My dog was barking, very frustrating. They've built a game plan, like I guess all best game plans, built around the skills in their team. They're, enormously skilled team, and for all the talk, I understand all of the criticism about the academy picks and father-son and the advantages they've got, but geez, I love watching the Lions play, and they've built a game plan up there that really suits their players. The suite of medium players that I mentioned before who do my head in. So many high-quality kicks, and so they've built a game plan around moving the ball up the ground with those short 20, 30 metre kicks, and with high skill, like that. It does my head in how often in AFL footy those kicks are missed, but not many by the Lions. A super impressive unit, but they are aggressive. They move the ball forward, not laterally, as I mentioned, and they've got those skill to go forward, and then they will go quick, but predominantly by hand. And so, the only real way to beat that method, or the key way to build that method, is to really pressure the kicker, to get right up on the grill of the kicker, perhaps even more, that's important, but also pressing right up on the receiver, who the player leading to space to get that ball, and either spoil, ideally intercept, or spoil that kick, or at the very least hold them up so they can't do that next quickly. And I think they're really, the other thing that's advantaged them, I think, is the stand rule, because it meant, it really it makes it better for those kickers to be able to sort of stand to move to the side and not have the player on the mark be able to cover those low bullet kicks. I think that change has really helped. It's helped. Whilst the idea of that is to get the ball moving quickly, and that helps us because you can give those handball loop. The handball receives, and you can run off the mark. It really helps the Lions because it means that the person on the mark can't disrupt as much those scything sort of kicks that they like doing. reflecting the way they like to play. They're number one in kicks per game. They're fourth in disposals per game in total. They're second in marks per game, obviously that kick mark, and also reflecting that they're a kicking side. They're 15th in handball per game. But they're certainly not just an outside side relying on just their kicking. They're first in clearances per game, they're fourth in contested marks per game, they're second in centre clearances per game, and they're first in stoppage clearances per game. So, they're a great kicking side. They can get it to the outside. Obviously, they move. They've got quality players on every single line, but they're also very strong contest side, stoppage side, and as I said, number one in clearances per game. Some notable stats about the difference in the two game plans, ours and theirs, reflecting King's territory focused low disposal game plan. We're second in the AFL for metres gained per disposal. The Lions are 12th at 16.2 metres gained per disposal. And we're number 6 for average metres gained by hand, 247 metres per game. I mentioned the Swans are number 1. They're 434.2 metres gained by hand. The Swans are. That's bananas. The Lions are only 16th. They only average 95.7 metres gained by hand per game. So that's I think it sort of gives a real good sense of the difference in the two game plans. I found this really surprisingly in terms of equity points for ball use. They're only 8th in the AFL for how they use the ball, or the impact of how they use the ball is a better way to think of it, averaging 46.3 points per game when you aggregate all 23 players' points that they get for winning the ball. For how they use the ball. I would have thought with their kicking skills that that they'd be perhaps higher than that. I guess though. It's about scoreboard impact, and so perhaps that points to an opportunity that they're not scoring as often, with that ball use as say the Swans are. We're actually 4th in the AFL for equity points for our ball use when you aggregate it up against the team. So, with the top 3 are the Suns, Swans, and Dogs. So we're in pretty good company with how we use the ball. Again, that measures scoreboard impact, not just disposal efficiency. So that's really why I like that measure. I think in this game, much will depend on whether we have the gas in the tank to be able to do the sort of defensive running. I'll mention this again, but if there's any hint of fatigue, they're going to cut us apart. I think that this is probably not all that surprising. It's hardly a big call given their talent, skill, and their skill level. Their talent levels and their skill levels. I fear that we'll struggle defensively big time against them. That's no real worry about us this year. Is our defensive sort of system? It's going to be tested all year. Their flotilla of high quality small medium forwards, the mids and utilities, the Lamont, the McCluggage, Neil, Bailey, Fletcher, the Ashcroft boys, etc. They're both key to how they transition the ball with their laser-like kicking and the ability to lead up and take those marks, but also their scoring power, because they all kick goals, and it's something that we really need to add to our game, to have our players like Windsor kicking more goals, and of course Coles when he's playing on the ball, and we need more out of our mids to be able to do that. As I said, much will depend in that sense on our, like everything, on our intensity and our ability to, or capacity, perhaps a better way to think it, to press up on their kickers and receivers, put them under pressure. Any hint of last week fatigue, as I said, no, they'll absolutely cut us up. Another key will be stopping their tolls, particularly, of course, Morris. So they're number 2 in the AFL, behind the Hawks for percentage of offensive one-on-one contests won. So they're winning 34.8% of their offensive one-on-one contests. So that's going to be key for us to win more of our defensive one-on-one contests. But they're not as strong defensively, the Lions, which surprised me a little bit. And so hopefully that's something we can exploit. They don't defend the fast break. The sort of style we like to use all that well. When they turn the ball over in their attacking half, they rank 14th for points conceded from defensive half transition. And whilst we're not great defending defensive one-on-one contests, we're number 17 in the AFL, unfortunately losing 37.3% of our one-on-one defensive contests. The Lions aren't great either. They're mid-table. They're 8th for that stat. So, one-on-one up forward, hopefully JBR can get back to his best form. Checkers as well. That's what we really need to look to exploit, is to exploit their defensive weakness in one-on-one contests. We want a fast end-to-end turnover game. We want to get it into our 50 quickly, with fast, creative ball movement laterally where needed, where we can. So they can't set up their defensive structure. That's going to be key because, they put a lot of effort into creating intercepts. Obviously, Andrews is key to that. The faster we can move the ball, it will make it difficult for them to get back and create that sort of intercept sort of structure that they really want to do. And it'll also help us mitigate Andrew's influence, because hopefully we can bypass him. We'll need to. But if they slow us down and we can't get fast ball movements and overlap running, we'll find it hard to not do what we do a lot of the time, is just kick to Andrews all game, and we don't want to be doing that. So the game will be won and lost, I think. It's a good sort of example of a game where we want it. If we get on our terms, we've got a chance. If it's all on the Lions' terms, of course, they're going to cut us up. Four key players to stop. I mentioned Andrews, important to their game plan in terms of intercepting, and I think that if we move the ball fast, then we can bypass him and minimise his influence. But the three other key players, Will Ashcross, he's averaging 15.6 kicks per game, nearly 12 handballs and 27.4 disposals in total. Lachie Neale, these are the three highest rated players. Ashcroft, not highest rated players, what I'm talking about. They're in terms of their disposal numbers. Lachie Neale is key. He's averaging nearly 30 disposals, 5.2 marks a game as well. Zach Bailey, one of my favourite non-Melbourne players, he's averaging 20, but key to it, and what I said before, he's averaging almost 2 goals, 1.8 goals per match. Lachie Neale was statistically their best clearance player, and last week against the Roos he was prolific. Had 21 game high, 21 contested possessions, 10 clearances, 30 disposal in total, 7 inside 50s. So a big task for us will be shutting him down. Obviously, perhaps a job for Colt maybe, and if not him, Steele. So yes, that's a preview of the game. I think I think we'll struggle to win this game, to get that out. But much will depend, I think, on we can't bring any of that fatigue or lethargy or whatever you want to call it into this game. They will absolutely destroy us. We really, I think for me the key is that we need to disrupt those kicks. So as much pressure as we can up on the player kicking the ball and on the receiver. And we want to be able to get our game plan going. And if we do, we might be able to exploit, I wouldn't say they've got defensive weaknesses as such, but as I noted before, they don't defend fast ball movement as well as some of the better defending sides. I'll put a note on that though. For the last 3 seasons, the Lions have done a brilliant job at peaking at the right part of the season, and they've been slow to start for the last 3 seasons. So that they're following a similar game plan, and by the end of the season, I've no doubt their defensive systems will have improved by then. But yeah, a lot will depend on our ability to get the game on our terms, move it quickly. As I said, perfect weather. Really looking forward to the game. A lot of high quality players on their side to watch, but I'll also be really interested to see what the response by the players is to last week's appalling performance. And you can call it fatigue, you can call it lethargy, whatever it wasn't. It was so disappointing, and how we respond to that will be really interesting. And I'm also fascinated to see how we go up against a different game plan. I've got a theory that if we will play better against teams like the Suns, who share a similar game plan to us, than teams that with a different sort of method, and Lions being one of them. Really looking forward to the game. Let's unpack it next Friday. Let's have all get to the G, support the boys. and we'll unpack it on Monday on the Demonland podcast and next Friday on the Stats File review and preview podcast. Go Red Leggers!